Welcome! Today I am presenting the magic square, also known as the miter square. There are two ways in which you can create the magic square, from the outside in or from the inside out. In this example is from the outside in, meaning we start with the outside stitches and then we knit it until this point where two stitches are bound off. The other way is where you cast on the center stitches and then you increase until you have a square. Let's show you how it's done. For this project, I am going to be using the Loom 2, the one with the nylon pegs. And the reason why I'm going to be using this knitting loom is due to the slider. This slider is going to allow me to decrease stitches easier for this project. Let's go ahead and show you. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to set the two stitch markers. We're going to set stitch marker A 12 on the 12th peg from that rail, from the second rail. So let's count 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So right there I'm going to drop my stitch marker. That's stitch marker A. Now I need to drop stitch marker B. Now these are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So right here I have 24 stitches. I'm going to cast on from marker B around to marker A so that my first row is from right to left. I am going to be using the yarn over cast on. You can use whatever other cast on you would like as long as it provides a nice firm foundation. So first thing first, let's make a slip knot. Place the slip knot on the last peg, the peg that has stitch marker B. Tighten that slip knot. Perfect. I usually use the slip knot as my first stitch. So I start on the second peg from the last, and I'm gonna E-wrap it twice for the yarn over cast on. And E-wrap it twice. There we go, 24 pegs have been casted on. Row 1. For row 1 we are going to knit 10 stitches, then we're going to create a knit 2 together, then another knit 2 together, and then we're going to knit 10, which basically is knitting to the end of the row. This is where the magic happens. This is where your straight row starts creating a square. So let's get to that point of the knit 2 together. So I'm simply going to bring my working yarn around the last peg, that first peg, around and back to the front. I'm going to be creating a knit stitch. There we go, knit. One more. Again, we need to knit 10 pegs. That's 2. One more. 10. Perfect. Now we are going to create a knit 2 together. For the knit 2 together, we're simply going to move first stitch over to the second. Place that loop on top. Now you have a peg with 2 loops. Have a peg with those 2 loops right here and an empty peg. Bring the working yarn behind the empty peg and then in front of the peg that has 2 loops on it. Place your knitting tool through those 2 loops. Hook the working yarn. Perfect. Now that new loop, we're going to place it on the empty peg. Now that corner peg is empty and you are going to leave it empty. Let's forget about it for now. Now we're gonna work on the slider piece. Over here we need to create another knit 2 together. So we're gonna move this loop over one spot. Place it on that peg. Okay. It's trying to escape. Again, bring the working yarn behind the empty peg and then in front of the peg that has the 2 loops. Hooking those 2 loops, treating them as one. Catch the working yarn, forming your new stitch. Place that new stitch on the empty peg of the slider, of the corner, of that corner slider right there. Now you have that empty peg right next to it, right? Don't worry, we're gonna cover it up in a second. So now we're gonna knit again, bring the working yarn behind the empty peg and then in front of the next peg, knit it, and then bring it over to the empty peg. We are moving over the stitches as we are knitting them. Right? One more. All the slider stitches have been knitted. Now we're gonna move over to the rail, bringing the working yarn behind the empty peg and then in front of that first one. Now this stitch from this corner peg is going to go on the last stitch of the slider. Perfect. Now this is where your slider comes in really handy. Now we're simply gonna slide it over one spot. You see that? It was right here lined up with the corner pegs, but now it's not because those two corner pegs are empty. And all we did was slide it in one little spot. And we're again lined up. Now we just need to knit to the end. That was so easy. I love how the slider allows us to just decrease without having to move every single stitch on the loom. Right here we have completed row 1. For row 2 is very simple. All we need to do is purl all the way back to marker A. So go ahead and purl, bring your working yarn below that stitch, purling. I am going to fast forward this section since you probably are familiar on how to purl, and then I'll go ahead and I'll demonstrate one more row for you on the decreases, and then I think you'll get the idea of how to get them done. Here we are. I have just finished row number 2. Now for the pattern, it's basically the same thing that we're doing. We're repeating row 1 and row 2, except instead of knitting 10, we're gonna knit 9 and then create the decrease, and then knit 8, then 7, all the way down until we get to knitting 1. So I am going to demonstrate one more row for you, and then I think you'll get the idea of what's happening. So we're gonna knit to within 2 pegs of the center of this right now. So within 2 pegs, and it happens to be that those 2 pegs, to within those 2 pegs, is right where the slider and the rail stitches meet. So right now it's right here at this point. After this decrease that we're gonna create in this next section, it's gonna move one, the slider is going to move down one spot, and then within the 2 stitches again is going to be where the corners of the rail and the slider stitches meet. So for our purposes, it's right here, and right here where our decreases happen. So let's knit 9. So I just found this yarn in my stash, and I have to say I love it. I don't even remember what it is. It doesn't have a paper or anything, but it is so beautiful. It feels so good to the hands. I wish I knew what it was now. Huh. I guess that's what happens when you have so much stash. Alright, here we go. 9. Again, we're within 2 stitches of that corner, and we're gonna create a knit 2 together. And for that, we're simply going to move the first stitch over to the second, bring the working yarn behind that empty peg, knit those 2 stitches together. Alright, let's try that again. There we go. Now once we have that loop, we're gonna place it on the empty peg, leaving that corner peg empty. turn the loom around. Now we're gonna deal with those 2 pegs right there. It's another knit 2 together, so we're gonna move that first stitch over to the second, bring the working yarn behind the empty peg and in front of the peg that has the 2 loops. Catch the working yarn, making a stitch, place a new stitch on the emptiest peg from before. Bring the, now that we created that knit 2 together, now we knit all the way to the end, which should be 9 stitches. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. Perfect. Now we're gonna knit. As you knit it, move them over. Knit it, move it over, knit it, and move it over. Have an empty peg on that slider. Don't despair, it is going to be covered in just a second. You are going to knit the first peg on that rail, on the second rail. Once you knit it, bring that new stitch over to the slider. Now we're gonna slide the slider down one spot right there. Tighten that a little bit, put some muscle into it. There we go. Now we continue knitting down the rail, down to marker B. There we go, that's row 3. As you can see, it's very simple. You're just decreasing twice right at the center. Row 4, simply purl down to marker A. Alright, I think now that you got an idea of what's going on, I am going to let you practice it by yourself, and then I am going to come down and I am going to show you the last 4 rows or so that we can see how everything ends. Alright, let's get you to that point.